I wasn't supposed to be home that early. The client meeting I'd been dreading for weeks got rescheduled at the last minute, giving me an unexpected afternoon off. As I pulled into the driveway, a sense of calm washed over me. It was a rare gift, time to surprise my wife, Emma, with her favorite takeout and spend a lazy afternoon together. Balancing the bag of Thai food in one hand and my briefcase in the other, I quietly opened the front door. The house was unusually silent, except for the faint sound of Emma's voice coming from the living room. I smiled, imagining her on one of her long calls with her sister. But as I walked closer, her tone shifted, soft and unfamiliar. I froze mid-step. "You know he'd never suspect," Emma said, her words low and deliberate. The blood drained from my face. My heart thudded in my chest, pounding like a war drum. Who was she talking to? What was this about? "It's just, he trusts me completely," she continued, her voice trembling slightly, as if guilt was trying to claw its way out. "And I hate lying to him. But you make me feel alive in a way he doesn't anymore." The bag of food slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a muted thud. Panic set in. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to charge into the room and demand answers, but my instincts held me back. I crept closer, silently stepping into the shadows of the hallway. "It's not like I don't love him," Emma added, her voice thick with a blend of guilt and defiance. "But what we have, it's different. Exciting. And he's just predictable." I leaned against the wall, my mind spiraling. My wife, the woman I'd loved for 15 years, was talking about me like I was nothing more than a tired routine in her life. Every laugh we'd shared, every moment we'd spent building a life together, felt like it was being ripped apart in real time. "Tonight?" she asked, and I heard the faint creak of the couch as she shifted. "I don't think he'll be home until late, so yeah, it's safe." The knot in my stomach tightened. Whoever was on the other end of that call had no idea that I was standing just a few feet away, every word slicing through me like a blade. I wanted to scream, to confront her, but I knew I needed more. If this was what I feared it was, I had to be sure. Emma ended the call with a quiet, "I'll see you soon." Her tone softened, almost tender. "I can't wait." I stepped back into the shadows as she got up, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. She didn't notice the spilled food on the floor or my car parked in the driveway. She was too preoccupied, her mind elsewhere. When I heard the door to our bedroom close, I finally exhaled, my chest heaving. My entire body trembled as I tried to process what I'd just heard. Emma was cheating on me. I couldn't deny it anymore. But instead of giving in to despair, something darker stirred within me, a need to act. I wouldn't storm into the bedroom, yelling accusations and demanding explanations. No, that wasn't me. I was calculated, patient, and thorough. I crouched down to pick up the takeout bag, carefully placing it on the counter. My hands shook as I opened my laptop and logged into my private email. Years of working as an IT consultant had taught me one valuable skill. No one's secrets are safe if you know where to look. Within minutes, I'd set up tracking software on Emma's phone, ensuring I could access her texts, calls, and location in real time. I felt sick to my stomach as I worked, but I knew it was necessary. If she thought I was predictable, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. Later that evening, Emma emerged from the bedroom, dressed in an outfit I hadn't seen before. It wasn't overtly revealing, but it was enough to make me suspicious. She caught me staring and smiled, a smile I now knew wasn't meant for me. "Work ran late, huh?" she asked casually, grabbing her purse. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "I figured I'd pick up dinner on the way home." Her eyes flicked to the untouched food on the counter. "Oh, that's sweet, but I promised Laura I'd meet her for a quick coffee tonight. I'll eat when I get back, okay?" "Sure," I said, keeping my tone light. As she walked out the door, I felt the weight of her deception settle over me. But there was no time to wallow. I grabbed my phone, opened the tracking app, and watched her location update in real time. She wasn't going to Laura's. This wasn't just the unraveling of my marriage. It was a war I hadn't realized I was already fighting, and I had no intention of losing. I sat there for a moment, staring at the app on my phone as the little blued moved across town. My hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white, the weight of betrayal pressing hard against my chest. But I forced myself to breathe. There was no room for panic. This was about gathering proof, planning my next move, and ensuring I came out of this on top. The dot stopped at a familiar location, a boutique hotel on the other side of town. My heart dropped. I recognized the name. We had stayed there on our 5th anniversary. The place held sentimental value, or at least it used to. Now, it was tainted, a symbol of her lies. I grabbed my keys, slipping out the back door to avoid any curious neighbors. As I drove, my mind raced with possibilities. Who was this person she was meeting? How long had this been going on? And, most importantly, why? I wasn't naive enough to think I could get those answers tonight, but I could start piecing together the puzzle. When I arrived, I parked a block away, ensuring my car wouldn't be seen. I needed to be smart, invisible. A part of me felt ridiculous, like a character in some soap opera, but another part of me knew that this was the only way to uncover the truth. The hotel lobby was quiet, dimly lit with soft jazz playing overhead. I slipped inside, keeping my head down and moving quickly toward the staircase. The receptionist barely glanced at me, more interested in her phone than the man whose life was crumbling before her eyes. The tracking app told me she was on the 3rd floor, room 312. My stomach churned as I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I pressed my ear against it, heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it inside. For a few moments, there was silence. Then, faint laughter. Her laughter. It was light, flirtatious, a sound that once belonged to me. "I thought you'd never ask," Emma said, her voice dripping with excitement. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. The urge to kick the door in and confront her was overwhelming, but I held back. I needed more. I pulled my phone from my pocket and started recording, capturing every word, every sound. "It's been so hard to keep this a secret," she continued. "But honestly, I think it makes it even more exciting." Her words were like daggers. Each one carved another wound into my chest. "I'm just glad you're here now," came a man's voice, low and smooth. I didn't recognize it, but I would. Soon, footsteps approached the door, and I panicked, stepping into the shadows of a nearby alcove. The door opened slightly, and I caught a glimpse of him, a tall, well-dressed man with salt and pepper hair. He handed the hotel's "Do Not Disturb" sign to Emma, who placed it on the door handle before closing it again. I leaned back against the wall, trying to process what I had just seen. He wasn't anyone I recognized, but that didn't mean much. Emma worked with a lot of people. Was he a colleague? A client? I wanted answers, but I couldn't risk being seen. Instead, I slipped back down the stairs and into the lobby, where I approached the receptionist with my most charming smile. "Excuse me," I said, leaning casually against the desk. "I'm supposed to meet someone in room 312, but my phone died, and I forgot the name they reserved it under. Any chance you could help me out?" The receptionist looked up, clearly unimpressed, but after a moment of hesitation, she sighed and checked her computer. "It's reserved under a Mr. David Lancaster," she said, her tone bored. "Thanks so much," I replied, my mind locking onto the name. David Lancaster. Now I had something to work with. Back in my car, I began digging. A quick search revealed that David Lancaster was a regional manager for one of Emma's company's biggest clients. My blood boiled. This wasn't just personal. It was professional. She wasn't only betraying me, she was jeopardizing her career. But as much as I wanted to drive home and confront her, I knew this wasn't enough. If I wanted to end this on my terms, I needed more evidence. The next few hours were a blur. I called an old friend, Greg, who ran a private investigation firm. Greg was the type of guy who thrived on this kind of thing, efficient, discreet, and ruthless when necessary. He agreed to meet me the next morning to discuss surveillance options. When I finally got home, the house felt cold and empty. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the walls as the reality of my situation sank in. The woman I had shared my life with, trusted implicitly, was upstairs in a hotel room with another man. I poured myself a drink, the whiskey burning my throat as I swallowed it down. The pain was sharp, almost unbearable, but I let it fuel me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Before going to bed, I set the tracking app to alert me if Emma's location changed. I also forwarded the recording from the hotel to a secure drive, ensuring I had backups of everything. Tomorrow, I would meet with Greg, finalize my plan, and begin dismantling the facade Emma had built around her lies. She thought I'd never know, but I was already 2 steps ahead. And when the time came, I wouldn't just expose the truth. I'd make sure the world saw her for who she really was. The morning light filtered through the blinds as I sat in my car, parked outside Greg's office. The coffee in my hand had long gone cold, untouched as I stared at the dashboard, replaying everything that had unfolded the night before. My jaw tightened, and my resolve hardened. Today, I'd set the wheels in motion. Greg greeted me with his usual no-nonsense attitude. His office smelled faintly of cigar smoke, and the walls were lined with photos of him in military gear from his days as a Marine. He gestured for me to sit, his sharp eyes studying me as he leaned back in his chair. "You look like hell," he said bluntly, lighting a cigar. "Feel worse," I admitted, sliding my phone across the desk. "This is everything I've got so far. Recordings, her location, even his name." "David Lancaster." Greg raised an eyebrow, taking the phone and scrolling through the files. "You weren't kidding. You've got a solid start here. But if you're looking to end this cleanly, you'll need more than just breadcrumbs. You need the whole damn loaf." I nodded. "That's why I'm here. I want everything. Texts, calls, photos, videos. I want to know how long this has been going on, where they meet, what they do. I want proof so undeniable that she can't wiggle out of it." Greg smirked, clearly impressed by my determination. "All right, I'll put my best guy on this. Give me 48 hours, and I'll have something for you. In the meantime, keep playing it cool. Don't let her suspect a thing." Cool. That word felt foreign to me now, like a language I no longer understood. But I nodded anyway. I couldn't afford to tip my hand. Not yet. Back home, Emma was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. She wore the same smile I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, but now it felt like a mask, hiding the lies she'd so carefully constructed. "Morning, babe," she chirped, placing a plate of eggs and toast in front of me. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. The smell of the food turned my stomach, but I picked up my fork and played along. As she sat across from me, scrolling through her phone, I studied her. Was this the same woman I'd shared my life with? The mother of my children? Or had she always been this stranger, hiding behind an illusion of love and loyalty? "You're quiet today," she said, glancing up. "Just tired," I lied. "Work's been stressful lately." Her expression softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine concern in her eyes. But it didn't matter. I knew what she'd been doing. Concern wasn't enough to erase the damage. After breakfast, Emma kissed me on the cheek and headed upstairs to shower. As soon as I heard the water running, I grabbed her phone from the counter. My fingers moved quickly, unlocking it with the passcode I'd memorized long ago. Her messages were a minefield of mundane conversations with friends and family, but as I scrolled further, I found the hidden folder she likely thought I'd never look for. Inside were texts with David. "David, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." "Emma, me too. I wish we could have more nights like that. He's working late tomorrow. Maybe we could meet then?" My chest tightened as I read through the exchanges. Flirty, explicit, filled with promises of stolen moments and secret desires. The kind of messages I hadn't received from her in years. But it was the photos that broke me. There she was, smiling coyly into the camera, wearing lingerie I'd never seen before. Images meant for him, not me. The shower turned off upstairs, and I quickly put the phone back in its place, my heart pounding. I felt like a stranger in my own home, surrounded by memories that now felt like lies. Greg called later that afternoon, his voice steady and confident. "You're not going to believe this," he began. "I've got enough to sink her and then some." She's been meeting him for months, mostly at that hotel, but also at his office. And it gets better. She's been using company resources to cover some of their little rendezvous. My stomach churned. Company resources? How? Expense accounts, mileage reimbursements, even claiming time off to attend work-related events. She's playing a dangerous game. "And David?" I asked, My voice cold. He's no saint either. Married, with 2 kids. If his wife gets wind of this, he's toast. Not to mention his career. A grim smile tugged at the corner of my lips. Good. Let's make sure she finds out. Greg chuckled. I like the way you think. I'll package everything up, photos, texts, expense reports. You'll have a full arsenal by tomorrow. I hung up, my mind racing. Emma thought she was untouchable, that her lies would never catch up to her. But she was wrong. That night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I felt the weight of the plan forming in my mind. Every laugh, every touch, every stolen glance between us felt hollow. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her warmth almost unbearable. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. I lied, staring at the screen. The clock was ticking, and she had no idea. The day after my meeting with Greg, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I now had the tools to dismantle the facade Emma had built and expose the lies she had woven into the fabric of our marriage. The plan was in motion, and all I needed to do now was wait. Emma was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, her hair tied back, humming along to a song on the radio. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. She looked radiant, almost angelic, a cruel irony considering the hell she had put me through. Morning, she said brightly, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. Morning, I replied, forcing a small smile. Big plans at work today? She asked, leaning against the counter with her own mug. Nothing too exciting, I said, taking a sip. The coffee was bitter, or maybe that was just me. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say something, then smiled again. Well, I hope it's a good day. I nodded, my eyes lingering on her a moment longer than usual. Did she know? Was there a flicker of guilt behind her smile, or was it all in my head? Either way, it didn't matter. The truth was coming for her, whether she saw it or not. By the afternoon, I had the file Greg had compiled. It was brutal. Dozens of photos of Emma with David, time-stamped receipts from their hotel stays, and explicit messages exchanged between them. There was even video footage of them leaving his office late at night, looking far too comfortable with one another. But the crown jewel of the evidence was an email Emma had sent to David from her work account. It was short and to the point. I can't stop thinking about last night. You make me feel things I haven't felt in years. Can't wait for Thursday. The casualness of her words stung more than I expected. She spoke to him with a freedom and passion that had been missing from our marriage for years. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. That hurt more than anything. Greg's final note read like a battlefield assessment. Your move? When Emma came home that evening, I was already at the dining table with a glass of scotch in hand. She walked in with her usual air of cheerfulness, dropping her bag by the door and kicking off her heels. Hey, she said, smiling at me. You're home early. I nodded, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. Thought I'd take a break today. Clear my head. She hesitated, her smile faltering just a fraction. Everything okay? Fine, I said, gesturing to the seat across from me. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. Her eyes widened slightly, but she sat down, folding her hands on the table. What's on your mind? I leaned back, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. How's work been? Busy? She blinked, surprised by the question. Yeah, it's been hectic. You know how it is. I do, I said, taking another sip. Must be exhausting, all those late nights. Her smile froze. Late nights? You know, I said casually, working late at the office, client meetings, hotel stays. Her face paled, and she reached for her water, taking a slow sip to buy time. What are you getting at? I leaned forward, setting my glass down with a deliberate thud. You're a smart woman, Emma. I think you know exactly what I'm getting at. Her eyes darted to the side, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. I don't know what you mean. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opening the folder Greg had sent me. The screen displayed a photo of her and David, arm in arm, walking into the hotel. I slid it across the table. Her hand flew to her mouth as she stared at the image, her face crumbling. This isn't what it looks like. Don't insult me by lying, I said, my voice icy. I know everything. The hotel, the messages, the emails, all of it. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might actually feel remorse. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice shaking. I never meant for this to happen. I laughed bitterly. Never meant for it to happen? You've been seeing him for months, Emma. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Repeatedly, she reached across the table, but I pulled my hand away. Please, just let me explain, she pleaded. Explain? I said, standing abruptly. What's there to explain? That you decided our marriage wasn't enough? That I wasn't enough? It's not like that, she sobbed. I love you. I do. This was just... Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to justify this. For the first time, her expression hardened. What do you want from me then? To grovel? To beg for forgiveness? Fine. I'm sorry, okay? I was stupid, and I made a mistake. But we can fix this. We can. No, we can't, I said, my voice cold and final. This isn't something you can fix, Emma. You've destroyed everything. Her tears fell freely now, but I felt no sympathy. All I felt was the weight of the evidence in my hands and the satisfaction of knowing that her lies were finally unraveling. And this was only the beginning. Emma sat frozen, her tear-streaked face a portrait of shock and desperation. The room was thick with tension, the weight of my revelations pressing down on both of us. I didn't feel triumphant, at least, not yet, but I did feel something, control. For the first time in weeks, I held all the cards, and she knew it. But just as I was about to press further, my phone buzzed on the table. It was Greg. I hesitated, then stood and walked to the kitchen, leaving Emma at the dining table. The timing was odd. Greg wasn't the type to call without a good reason. Greg, I answered, keeping my voice low. What's going on? His voice was unusually tense. You're not going to like this. My stomach nodded. What is it? There's more to this story than just Emma and David, Greg said. I had my guy dig deeper into David's background, and it turns out he's not just a regional manager for her company. He's tied up in some shady stuff. Fraud, embezzlement, and a whole string of affairs with other women in the office. I frowned, pacing the kitchen. Why does that matter? Emma's betrayal is personal. I don't care about his other conquests. You should care, Greg said sharply, because Emma's name is all over his expense reports. If this comes out, and it will, you're looking at more than just a divorce. This could destroy her career, and by extension, yours. People are going to ask questions. They always do. I gritted my teeth. The idea of Emma being dragged through the mud didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. She deserved the fallout, didn't she? But Greg's words lingered. He wasn't talking about just personal repercussions. This could get ugly, legally, and professionally. What do you suggest? I asked, my voice tight. You have two options, Greg said. You can burn it all to the ground. Expose her. Expose David. Let the chips fall where they may. Or you can use this information as leverage. Make her give you everything in the divorce. Full custody, the house, whatever you want. But you'll have to keep quiet about David's crimes. I let out a slow breath, the weight of the decision sinking in. Let me think about it. You don't have long, Greg warned. David's wife is already suspicious. If she blows this up, it's out of your hands. I hung up, my mind racing. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. This was bigger, Messier. The clean revenge I'd envisioned was slipping through my fingers. When I returned to the dining room, Emma looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She must have sensed the shift in my demeanor because she asked cautiously, "What's wrong?" I sat down across from her, steepling my fingers. Do you know who you're really involved with, Emma? Do you have any idea what David's been doing behind the scenes? Her brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Fraud, embezzlement, I said coldly. And you're tied to it, whether you realize it or not. Your name is on his expense reports. If this blows up, it won't just be him going down. It'll be you too. Her face paled. That's not possible. I didn't. Didn't you? I interrupted, pulling up the files Greg had sent. You signed off on these. You attended these work events. Don't act like you're innocent in this. She leaned back, trembling. I didn't know. I thought it was legitimate. I didn't. Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. I let the silence hang between us, letting her absorb the gravity of the situation. Finally, I spoke. You've got two choices, Emma. You can come clean to everyone, your boss, HR, David's wife, and deal with the fallout. Or you can make this easy for both of us. Sign the divorce papers, give me full custody of the kids, and I keep my mouth shut. Her head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes wide with disbelief. You'd blackmail me? Don't make this about morality, I snapped. You made your choices, Emma. I'm just making sure I don't go down with you. She stared at me, her lips trembling. You can't. I can't lose my kids. Then do the right thing, I said. Sign the papers. Walk away. You'll still see them, but you don't get to be the primary parent after what you've done. She broke into sobs, her hands clutching the edge of the table. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You've done just that. And now you're going to live with the consequences. That night, after Emma had retreated to the guest room, I sat alone in the dark living room, staring at the files Greg had sent. The evidence was damning, not just for Emma but for David as well. I could ruin them both with a single email. But as I sat there, another thought crept into my mind. What if I went further? What if I didn't just take custody of the kids or the house? What if I made sure David lost everything? His job, his family, his reputation. He was as guilty as Emma, if not more. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a twisted sense of purpose. The unexpected turn in this saga had given me an opportunity one hadn't anticipated. Tomorrow, I would make my decision. But one thing was certain. Emma and David had underestimated me, and they were about to pay the price. The morning after my confrontation with Emma, I woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. I'd spent the night crafting my strategy, every step designed to ensure that neither she nor David escaped the consequences of their actions. The game wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Emma was quiet at breakfast. Her usual bubbly demeanor was replaced with a somber silence as she pushed her food around on the plate. I didn't speak either, letting the tension simmer between us. Every now and then, I caught her glancing at me, her expression a mix of fear and desperation. After she left for work, I called Greg. I've made my decision, I said. We're going all in. Greg chuckled darkly. I thought you might say that. What's the plan? I want David ruined, I said, my voice cold and steady. I want his wife to know everything, his company to see the fraud, and I want Emma's part in this exposed. But I don't want her destroyed. I need her to stay on the hook just enough to sign the papers and agree to my terms. Greg let out a low whistle. You're playing a dangerous game, my friend. I didn't choose this, I replied. But I'm not backing down. By the afternoon, everything was in motion. Greg's team had compiled a comprehensive dossier on David, complete with his fraudulent expense claims, shady financial dealings, and proof of his affair with Emma. The evidence was airtight, enough to spark an internal investigation at his company and destroy his reputation. But the piece de resistance was a carefully crafted letter addressed to David's wife, Sarah. It included screenshots of his explicit messages with Emma, photos of their hotel meetings, and even receipts showing how he'd used family funds to finance their trysts. The letter would be hand-delivered by one of Greg's operatives, ensuring it reached her directly. That evening, I waited for Emma to come home, knowing she had no idea the storm I was about to unleash. When she walked through the door, she looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped under the weight of her guilt. I could see it in her eyes. She was still trying to figure out how to salvage what little was left of our marriage. Can we talk? She asked softly, setting her bag down. I gestured to the couch, and she sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, her voice trembling. About signing the papers, about custody. I don't want to lose you or the kids. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch. It's too late for that, Emma. The damage is done. The best thing you can do now is cooperate. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I'll sign the papers. That's not all. I said, leaning forward. I need you to tell me everything. How it started, how long it's been going on, and why. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. It started 6 months ago, she admitted. David and I worked closely on a project, and one night after a late meeting, we crossed a line. I didn't mean for it to happen, but once it did, I couldn't stop. He made me feel. Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharp. Don't you dare tell me he made you feel alive or special or whatever excuse you've been telling yourself. This wasn't about feelings, Emma. It was about selfishness. Her lip quivered, but she said nothing. I know everything, I continued. Every hotel, every expense, every lie. And so does his wife. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. What? What did you do? I sent her the truth, I said calmly. She deserved to know. Emma's face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands. You've ruined me, she whispered. Do you have any idea what this will do to my career? To my life? You ruined yourself, I shot back. And as for your career, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to mix business with pleasure. The fallout came swiftly. By the next morning, David's wife had filed for divorce. His company launched an internal investigation, and his name was all over the local gossip mill. Emma was called into HR later that day, grilled about her role in the expense fraud. She returned home that evening pale and shaken, her voice barely above a whisper when she said, "They suspended me." I felt no sympathy. This was what she deserved. But I wasn't done yet. Good, I said. Now sign the papers. She did, her hand trembling as she scrawled her signature on the divorce agreement. Full custody of the kids was mine, along with the house. She would get visitation rights, but nothing more. I'd made sure of that. Greg called later that night, his voice filled with satisfaction. It's done. David's finished. His wife's lawyer is already circling, and his company's cutting him loose. And Emma? I asked. She's shaken but intact, Greg replied. You played this well. I hung up, a strange sense of calm washing over me. I'd won. The woman who thought she could deceive me and the man who thought he could take what wasn't his had both paid the price. As I poured myself a drink and looked out at the quiet night, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. My life wasn't perfect, and there was still work to be done, but I was free. For the first time, I could see a future without Emma, and it didn't scare me. It gave me hope. The weeks following the fallout were a whirlwind. Emma moved out within days of signing the divorce papers, her once confident demeanor replaced by a quiet, resigned sadness. I didn't let myself dwell on her pain. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. David, on the other hand, was facing a full-scale implosion. His wife's lawyer had already filed for divorce, his company had terminated him, and rumors swirled about criminal charges tied to his fraudulent expense reports. The man who once thought he was untouchable was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. But for me, life was just beginning again. The house was quieter without Emma, but not lonely. The kids were my anchor, their laughter filling the spaces that might have otherwise felt empty. I threw myself into fatherhood, taking them to school, helping with homework, and spending weekends exploring local parks or building pillow forts in the living room. I wanted them to feel safe, loved, and unshaken by the chaos that had upended our family. If they noticed Emma's absence, they didn't say much, and I didn't press them. I knew those conversations would come eventually, but for now, I let them enjoy their innocence. One afternoon, Greg called to check in. Looks like you're handling this better than most, he said. I've seen men crumble under less. I don't have the luxury of falling apart, I replied. I have the kids to think about. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me, Greg said. And hey, I've got a new case brewing. If you ever want a side gig taking down scumbags, give me a call. I chuckled. I'll think about it. But in truth, I had no interest in revenge anymore. The satisfaction I'd felt watching Emma and David's lives unravel had been fleeting. Justice had been served, and now it was time to focus on moving forward. Emma's visitation days were awkward at first. She would arrive looking uncertain, her guilt etched into her features as she tried to reconnect with the kids. They were polite but distant, still processing the sudden changes in their lives. I kept my interactions with her civil but brief. She tried to apologize a few times, her voice heavy with regret, but I shut it down every time. There was no point in rehashing the past. The damage was done, and I wasn't interested in reopening old wounds. One day, as she was leaving, she stopped at the door and turned to me. "I know I can't fix what I've done," she said quietly, "but I hope someday you'll forgive me." I met her gaze, searching for any trace of the woman I'd once loved. "Maybe," I said, "but not today." Life slowly found its rhythm again. I started going to the gym, reconnecting with old friends, and focusing on my career. The kids and I fell into a comfortable routine, in the house, once a place of heartbreak, began to feel like home again. One evening, as I was tucking my youngest into bed, she looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, are you happy?" she asked. The question caught me off guard, but I smiled and kissed her forehead. "I'm getting there," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I meant it. Months later, I ran into Sarah Lancaster, David's now ex-wife, at a local coffee shop. She looked different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "Mark," she said, her face lighting up with a smile. "It's good to see you." "You too, Sarah," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Care to join me?" We spent the next hour talking about everything. Our kids, our jobs, and the surreal experience of watching our marriages implode. There was no bitterness in her voice, only resilience. By the time we finished our coffee, I realized I was smiling, a real, genuine smile. "Maybe we should do this again sometime," she said, her tone light but hopeful. "I'd like that," I said. As I drove home that evening, I thought about how far I'd come since that fateful day when I first overheard Emma's betrayal. I'd been angry, devastated, and lost, but I'd survived. And now, I was starting to thrive. The road ahead was uncertain, but it no longer felt daunting. For the first time in years, I felt free, not just from Emma's lies, but from the weight of who I thought I had to be. This was my life now, mine to rebuild, mine to enjoy, and I wasn't going to waste a second of it.